The next thing I want to talk about is equipment. That's something that some of the guys are already asking about in the side. We want to talk about color application as well, but let's kind of skip to number 5 and then go back to 4, which is equipment. And a lot of guys are wondering, what equipment do you use for your crankbaits? And I'll give you guys my suggestions first here, and then I'll have Randy give his suggestions as well. And I'm pretty straightforward with my crankbait equipment. In terms of the rods, I've been throwing the same rods with my deep diving crankbaits and shallow diving crankbaits since I was like 13 years old. And that is an Abu Garcia Veritas winch casting rod. They've made older versions of this rod dating back till 2010, and I've been throwing these for about 11 years. I have some that are still probably 8 or 9 years old. And these Veritas winch crankbait rods, they are a really solid rod. They have a moderate action. That's really the key you're going to find with a lot of good crankbait rods, is they're going to have a moderate taper. That is really key for me personally. And what I do is I match up the weight of my crankbaits to the actual lure weight that's recommended on these rods. So if you take a look, you can see that this is the 7-foot medium action Abu Garcia winch. And this is good for a 1/4 ounce to 5/8 ounce crankbait. So I throw this exact rod when I'm throwing my flat side crankbaits, smaller square bill crankbaits. And basically this lure weight is really key because it helps judge if you're going to be able to cast the bait effectively. If you throw a bait that's too heavy for this rod, for example, you're not going to be able to get the right distance. Or, for example, if you go to the 7-foot medium heavy and you try throwing a 1/4 ounce crankbait, you're not going to be able to cast it very far because it's not balanced properly to handle lighter baits. So I would honestly recommend picking up all 4 of these rods if you really want to get serious into crankbait fishing. The nice thing is they're $99, so you can pick up, you don't really need this extra heavy one usually, but you can pick up these rods right here, these first 4 rods. It will cover all of your crankbait fishing applications, and you can get them all for around $400 total, which is a really good deal. And what I basically, some of these are out of stock as you can see, but you can pick them up at tackle shops too, and over at Academy Sports. They have them, Bass Pro Shops everywhere. And really my 2 favorites are the 7-foot medium and then the 7.6 medium heavy. These are really good crankbait rods that are going to hold up to a lot of different applications. I like the 7-foot medium when I'm fishing against square bills, smaller crankbaits like a rock crawler, wiggle wart, stuff like that. And then I throw the 7'6" medium heavy when I'm fishing deeper diving crankbaits, whether that's a Strike King 6XD, an 8XD, Strike King Series 5 crankbaits. And then the only time I go to the 711 medium heavy is when I'm throwing those really big crankbaits, or the 711 heavy action. That's when I'm throwing like a Strike King 10XD. This crankbait rod works really well. Actually, I like the extra heavy even better, actually, now I'm thinking about it. I have all of these rods, but the extra heavy works great for those big, super deep diving, like 10XD style crankbaits. But this is still a pretty good rod for your regular 6XDs and stuff as well, this 711 heavy. And I pair all of these with actually an Abu Garcia winch Black Max reel. You can actually pick up that reel, Randy, on at Walmart. I buy them at Walmart. I don't know where else you can find them, but there's a Black Max winch crankbait reel, and I think you can find some. Actually, let me try to find one right here through Abu Garcia, and I'll find that while you kind of talk about your rods that you recommend. I'll see if I can find that. So what do you recommend, Randy, for your equipment?
Yeah, basically, like for shallow cranking, we're talking about. I basically have 3 different rods I use for all my crankbait fishing, shallow and deep too. But the 3 that I use are based upon the type of crankbait I'm using. If I'm using some type of heavier crankbait, like say that Megabass 2.0 S crank, or like the Deep 6 Megabass, some of the bigger, heavier crankbaits, my favorite rod is that Megabass Orochi Extreme Mission Tight, and that's a 7'5" rod. It's got a medium, sort of not really stiff, it's sort of just a typical medium tip on it, a good taper down to a stiff butt on there. The reason I like that rod, it's a long rod. You can make a long cast, and particularly on big crankbaits like that, I like a little bit stiffer rod because when you stop and go those big crankbaits, a stiffer rod, it gives that bait a little bit more lively looking action. If you use a real soft rod tip when you're pulling a big crankbait like that, unless you're pointing the rod tip straight at the bait, it's a little bit sluggish. Now, if I go to the medium type crankbaits like the Megabass, Deep X 300, or the Z2 crank, or maybe like the S crank 1.5, a little bit smaller one, that's when I go to the Megabass Orochi flat side special. It's a 7-foot rod. It's got a medium tip on it. It's a little bit shorter, and I like the little bit shorter rod because on those type of crankbaits, I'm usually making some type of a shorter cast around objects or something, around laydowns, brush, that type of stuff, where I'm not really needing the distance. So it gives me the casting accuracy, yet the efficiency to work the bait real good. On the small crankbaits that I'm fishing, any type of lighter crankbaits, that's when I use a spinning rod. And I use the same spinning rod that I do with my jerk baits, the Megabass Orochi Whip Snake. It's a 6-foot, 11-inch spinning rod. It's got a medium tip on it. And any of those small type crankbaits I'm fishing, flat side crankbaits, those crankbaits that are real light, like shad wraps, that type of stuff, I'm fishing on the spinning rod. And line size, like I said, it depends on the variation of the bait I'm using, but it's usually 6 to 25 pound test, Seaguar, Invizix, fluorocarbon. If I'm fishing square bills around super shallow water, sometimes I use monofilament because I don't want that stretch. And for the reels, I use the Lew's BB1 speed spool. If you guys have seen my videos, you probably call it the Screaming Mimi because they're so old that they really make a lot of noise. Actually, I've had them like 7 years, so that I've got to get some new reels. But that Lew's BB1 speed spool, it's a 7.1 gear ratio. I use nothing but 7.1 gears on every reel because I want to know what my reel's doing all the time without having to mess with gear ratios. So I just adjust my speed or retrieve, with how fast I crank the handle. And on the spinning reel, I use the Lew's TLC 3000, which is a wide spooled spinning reel.
Awesome. Good stuff. That's a good run in there. And I found some of these reels, guys. This is the Abu Garcia Black Max, $50. This is what I like to throw. Randy, you probably think it's crazy I throw all Black Max reels, but I find that they just work great for me offshore. I can bomb them a mile, and they're $50.
Oh, you can cast a mile. I've seen you do it, man.
I can outcast pretty much anyone with these Black Maxes. They fire into the wind. It doesn't matter. So I throw a Black Max a lot, and they do make a Black Max winch. So the regular Black Max is a 6:4 gear ratio reel, and that's actually not too bad when I'm fishing square bill crankbaits and like flat side crankbaits in a little bit shallower water, even like a rock crawler crankbait. But whenever I'm going to the bigger deep diving crankbaits, like a Striking 6XD, I like a 5:3 gear ratio reel or a 5:4. This is the Abu Garcia Revo winch, which is $199, but you can find at Walmart the Black Max Revo winch, or it's not the Revo, the Black Max winch reel. And the thing is it'll say winch on it, and it's a 5:4 gear ratio reel. You can basically buy 4 of those for the price of this one Revo winch, and for me, they work almost identically. They have a big wide spool. You can put a bunch of line on them and fire them a mile. So I find that you can just use the Black Max winch reel, basically you can buy 4 reels for the price of 1, pair them up with those $100 rods, all in, you're going to be spending like $600 and you can get 4 crankbait setups, $150 a piece, and it's literally exactly what I throw. And there was a question about the spinning reels. I do the same thing with my spinning reels. I use the Abu Garcia Max Pro spinning reel. It's one I've been testing out, and I like it a lot. I like the 30 size. It seems like it's the right size. $50. Works great. Drag system works great. So I love cheap reels. I don't know why. I did a reel review, Randy, a while back, and I wanted to do some cheap reels just for fun. And I didn't really expect anything out of the reel. But then I threw it for like a year and I had no issues, and it became like one of my favorite reels to throw. So I don't know why, but it's what I like to throw. One thing too, real quick, guys, is if you are going to check out any of the equipment we're talking about in this live stream, we really appreciate it if you'd head over to fishthemoment.com and went to the Support Fish the Moment tab. Here you'll find a Tackle Warehouse affiliate link. And if you just click this Tackle Warehouse link, it'll take you straight to Tackle Warehouse, and you can find the URL at the top. And if you bookmark the URL right up here, it's up here somewhere. If you bookmark the URL, every time you check out on Tackle Warehouse, we'll get a small percentage of the profits from your purchase, and it helps support us without doing anything else. If you just like the content, go to the Support Fish the Moment page, use this Tackle Warehouse link. You can either just go here every time and click it and then check out. As long as you don't leave Tackle Warehouse's website after clicking this link before checking out, we get a percentage of the profits. And again, a safe way to make sure you're going to do it is just bookmark this link on the top of your page. So every time you use Tackle Warehouse, you're helping us out a little bit. So yeah, that's it for the rod, reel, stuff like that. Do you have anything else, Randy, to kind of add on that end?
Yeah, a lot of it's just getting comfortable with the setup you have, and they're not one rod. You know, the reels and line and all that type of stuff. There's a little bit of give in there, but there's not one rod that you can really use for all your crankbaits. You just need to use the ones that allow for you to be the most efficient with the bait. So a lot of options out there.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. Cool. And then the other thing on equipment that we wanted to touch on really quickly is hooks. Hooks are a big deal with crankbait fishing, and I don't know about you, Randy, but every time I take a crankbait out of the package, regardless of the brand, I'm always upgrading the treble hooks, the stop treble hooks, 100% of the time. It's just a rule of thumb for me. I always do it because it always helps me land more fish. Would you agree on that?
Oh, there's no doubt. You know, when a fish is eating a crankbait, you can have junky, rusted hooks on it and still catch them. But the reason that you want to use the best and the right hook on your crankbait is to get those nippers, because most of the time they're not eating a crankbait real good. They're always nipping at it and getting the back hook. So that's why the type of hook and style is critical.
For sure. And I have a couple styles that I like, and I know you have some styles you like as well, Randy, so we'll kind of run through those. For offshore crankbait fishing, my go-to hook, and I've been throwing it forever, is the Gamakatsu EWG treble hook. Gamakatsu EWG, and I find that on most crankbaits that I throw that are in the, let's say the 1 to 2 inch size crankbaits, whether that's like a square bill crankbait, a medium diving crankbait like a rock crawler, using a size 4 treble hook works really, really well. The size 4 Gamakatsu EWG is a great just go-to treble for kind of your medium diving crankbaits, I would say. Maybe not as many. Some square bills, some medium diving crankbaits can't handle this big of a hook, but I throw this size hook as much as I can on those medium diving crankbaits. But when I go to a bigger crankbait like a Strike King 6XD, for example, my go-to size is the size 2. So go to the size 2 EWG treble. And I have caught so many fish on these hooks and hardly ever lose any fish on a crankbait when you pair the proper rod with these hooks. And the last thing I'd use is I use monofilament line when I'm cranking. So I'll actually use 10-pound monofilament. It has extra stretch, so when those fish pull, they pull the stretch out of the line and don't pull straight on the hook, and you won't lose as many fish. So if you pair up 10-pound monofilament line with a really nice Abu Garcia winch rod that bends in half pretty much, and then use these Gamakatsu treble hooks, you will hardly ever lose a fish on a deep diving crankbait. Now, sometimes these hooks are not going to quite be big enough to get the job done, so you can go to some of these short shank treble hooks and go to like a 1/0 hook. This is the Gamakatsu EWG short shank 2X. If you go to a 1/0 hook, those sometimes can be better for your like 8XD or 10XD crankbaits, those bigger deep diver crankbaits. And sometimes they even go to like an owner stinger hook that's a 2/0 hook, short shank. And those work really good on your giant big crankbaits, 10XDs. And then when you have your little crankbaits like a Spro rock crawler, a lot of times you need to use very specific hooks for that bait. And in the wintertime, I find that I also don't like to use an EWG style hook. So in the winter, I actually go to these Gamakatsu round bend trebles in bronze, and I use the size 5. So a size 5 round bend treble hook is awesome when I'm fishing like a rock crawler crankbait or a smaller, more compact crankbait in the winter, and also when I'm fishing flat side crankbaits in the winter. Basically, my rule of thumb is throw a round bend in the winter, and then in the summer, when those fish are more aggressive, I go to a EWG style hook. The only exception is when I'm deep cranking. I just always throw an EWG when I'm deep cranking. Never had any issues with fish missing my bait. Usually they eat it pretty well. So whenever I'm deep cranking, the EWG trebles, and then I'll go to EWGs in the summer when I'm shallow cranking, round beds in the winter when I'm cranking. And that's pretty much a hook selection. What are your thoughts there, Randy?
Oh man, hooks are a complicated topic because so much of it has to do with the space of your hook hangers on your crankbait and the length of the treble hook that you're using. Because the thing that you don't want about crankbaits is you don't want those hooks fouling all the time. So you definitely don't want to use a hook that has a shank too big that's fouling your hooks. And that's one of the things about, like Jonny was talking about, the EWGs. They have shorter shanks on them for the most part. So they're a really good choice on a crankbait. But for me, what I use is I've pretty much went the last few years to that Gamakatsu G Finesse treble. It's a nano coated treble. It's got an O'Shaughnessy bend on it, and it's got a fairly small barb. So it has, you have a really easy penetration with the nano coat and the small barb. And I'm looking for penetration a lot of times more than even holding power, because what you have on some of the hook brands like Mustads, for example, they're a good hook, but they got a really big barb on them, and they're great once the hook gets penetrated. But a lot of times on crankbait fishing, you have problems with penetration, and that's when you lose those fish. If once you get a fish hooked and penetrated past the barb on any barb, a lot of times it's hard for that bass to throw that bait unless they make multiple real hard jumps. So for mine, most of them I go to the G Finesse Gamakatsu treble. The only other times is if I'm fishing, say for example, some baits that have the real close hook hangers, like some of the lipless crankbaits are really, really bad about that, where the hook hangers are close together. That's when I will go to the shorter shanked EWG Gamakatsu on those particular ones, simply to keep my hooks from fouling up. Because although I like the O'Shaughnessy bend as far as on a treble, for me, it's more important not to have those hooks fouling, because I've lost a lot of fish over the years when those fish hit it and the bait's got the hooks fouled in it. And a lot of times you don't even know why that happens. I mean, think about it, guys. Think about how many times you've been crankbait fishing and you're reeling, and you got a fish on and you reel it halfway to the boat and it just comes off under the water. I promise you, a lot of the times when that happens, it's because your hooks are crossed or fouled, and those fish just aren't hooked, and they just open the mouth and they get off like that. So again, it's experimentation. The hook style is dependent upon the bait. It's dependent upon the body profile, the hook hanger lengths. There's a lot of variables with it.
Good stuff. Awesome. Well, that is it for our equipment. There's probably other stuff we missed. If you guys do want to learn more about equipment and just bass fishing tackle, check out Randy's YouTube channel. It's Intuitive Angling with Randy Blockett, and he talks about equipment. He's actually doing a series right now on all the different types of categories of baits. He just got done talking about flat side crankbaits, talked about balsa versus plastic crankbaits, different lipless crankbaits, all kinds of crankbait stuff going on. And he talks about all kinds of tackle every single day. So check out those YouTube videos from Randy if you haven't seen them.